Mr Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our police force and the wonderful work that they do. It is often a thankless job, and the manner in which policemen and policewomen undertake their work is admirable, and we on this side, and I think across this House, would say that we all have respect for the police force. And I won't go as far as Melissa Lee in acknowledging the Minister of Police, but I'll leave that part there. Now, currently, Mr Speaker, under the Policing Act 2008, if you are employed by the police as a constable, authorised officer or supervisor, a person must take leave of absence if they intend to stand for election for a local authority, for council, Mr Speaker. If they're successful, then that person has to resign from the police. And the provisions of the 2008 Act clarified provisions in the previous Police Act which also prevented police officers from standing in local body elections but were never fully enacted. The reasoning behind this was that it was perceived that it was wrong to have the same people making and enforcing regional bylaws. So the bill that we currently have before us, that is currently being debated, will remove this restriction. So policewomen and men will be able to stand for election to local authorities without taking a leave of absence, and if successful, then they will not have to resign from their police duties. And this will put police in the same position as other public servants. Now, Mr Speaker, I think we do need a little bit of background to the bill that we put in place in 2008. So Labor passed the Policing Act in 2008, but the restrictions on police officers standing as councillors were subject to a lot of debate at that particular time. We believed then, and we still believe now, in full and transparent democratic process. So it is a little bit concerning that here we are ramming this through the House under urgency with no consideration. But nonetheless, Mr Speaker, we will be supporting this bill. We ensured at the time of putting through the 2008 legislation, we ensured that while the provisions stopped conflicts of interest occurring, police officers were not discriminated against. They could still be involved in local body politics, but at that time it meant only on a community board, because there was not the same perceived risk of conflict of interest with sitting on a community board as what there was being an actual councillor. It was a difficult decision to make at the time, Mr Speaker, and there was a lot of discussion and debate, and in the end Labor decided to enact what the 1958 Police Act had originally intended. Now, Mr Speaker, the government must ensure that conflicts of interest or perceptions of conflicts of interest are safeguarded against. A councillor helping to pass a bylaw and then enforcing that bylaw in their role as a police officer will raise conflict of interest issues. However, this can be avoided relatively easily by the councillor in question declaring his or her conflict of interest when the bylaw is being debated in council, which we have seen with the 5 councillors that were councillors at the time of the 2008 legislation being passed, and were allowed to continue in that role. And there's been no complaints from what we've heard with regards to those 5 particular councillors. So this is not an issue that affects many people. At the time the Policing Act 2008 came into force, like I said, there were only 5 police officers serving as councillors across the whole country. And Labor was careful to ensure that those 5 councillors were able to continue fulfilling both roles for as long as they were elected representatives. And I must acknowledge here that the work of those 5 councillors, again, at no point have there been questions of undisclosed conflicts of interest with these councillors, and they've carried out their duties as both police officers and councillors are expected to do, and they've done so admirably. And my colleague George Hawkins was talking earlier about an example of one of those 5 councillors, that being Al Filipina, a Manukau City councillor. Clayton had another example from his particular area, and I have to agree with both of them, and with George Hawkins with regards to Al Filipina. He has always conducted himself with integrity. And without being politically biased, he does have fantastic politics. And he's a respected member of the community, not only as a police officer but also as a councillor. And I think that those are the types of people that we need in both those roles, and so we wouldn't want to take that away from them. And so I think that, in so many ways, they're good examples of why we should support this legislation and why we are supporting this legislation, Mr. Speaker. I did actually speak to Al Filipaina about this particular piece of legislation, and just discussing with him if there has ever been a conflict of interest that he was accused of not declaring, and he said not at all, that's never arisen, that although he was the chair of the Transport Committee and there could have been issues that arose there, he was very careful to ensure that whenever there was anything to do with bylaws and enforcement, that he declared that conflict of interest and he stepped back so that there was transparency there and no one could question his integrity with regards to any involvement that he might have as the chair of the Transport Committee for the Manukau City Council. And as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that does seem to be the case across the board for the 5 councillors that are currently police officers as well as serving as councillors in their particular areas. So Labor would have liked to have seen, Mr. Speaker, this bill go to Select Committee, because we would have actually liked to have heard from the public and from police officers with regards to their opinions, and I know that that was a big concern for the Green Party, and that's actually part of the reason why they haven't supported, they won't be supporting this legislation, and it is a concern of ours. But given that we're not going to get the opportunity, as this bill has been passed under urgency, which is disappointing, but we do recognise that the New Zealand Police Association and the New Zealand Police Managers Guild have been consulted in the development of this bill, and as police officers seem to be largely in favour of the restrictions on becoming councillors being removed, that's Labor will be supporting this bill based on that, Mr. Speaker. Now, as I said before, police officers regularly demonstrate their commitment to local communities, and it is only fair that they get the opportunity, as all other public servants do, to further demonstrate this commitment by standing for election and serving on local authorities. And a lot of people that are in the position as a councillor, as a local body representative, well, I think actually most have other jobs, and so many of them have declared interests as well. So given that that is the case, and a strong case has been put forward by the police with regards to why they should be allowed to do this, then we actually think it's important that we do support it. So there's no argument from this side for once, which is a very rare thing with regards to this particular piece of legislation. We do support this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Chester Borrows.